Hey guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. I thought I'd start this as a bit of a behind the scenes look at the things I normally get up to when I'm not filming courses or doing my actual day job. And the first thing we're going to do as far as bikes go is fit my 690 engine into my 390 RC. Now this is going to be relatively in-depth, so before I get started on that, I'm just going to build a workbench just so that I can raise up my RC's 390, 690 monstrosity up to me so I can work on it a little bit easier, and so that I can learn how to weld. I've never really had to do any welding at my proper job, so this will be a good example, or a good exercise for me at least, so I can figure out how to weld, because I get a sneaky feeling I'm going to be making some custom brackets to make those two things fit together. So the basic workbench I'm going to be building is two rectangles. The lower one has a set of wheels on it, and the top one has a wooden top on it, so that I can put a bike on it. And between the two, we're going to have 4 connecting arms, so that when I use a little trolley jack, I can lift up the top one a little bit higher, not super high, maybe half a meter off the ground, just to make life a little bit easier when I'm working on it. This is pretty common. If you Google workbench for motorcycle, this is probably what you're going to find. So I'm just going to try and copy that. I'm using pine for the top because it's nice and cheap, and every 2 years when it gets really gross and dirty, I can just replace it without having to, take out a home loan. And the steel I'll be using is just rectangular steel. So it's going to be 40 by 20, which is a pretty standard size and shape. So after measuring everything up, I realized I needed about 16 meters of steel to do the entire bench. Now I'm going to be working with a 1.6 mil rectangular tubing, which is relatively strong, so I won't need too much supports or bracing in it. And I'm just going to be using 25 mil square tubing for the locking mechanism. After I finished measuring everything out and cutting everything to length, the next thing I need to do is put in miter cuts. Now before I go and stand in front of a miter saw for 3 hours, it's always a little bit easier if you have a rough idea of all the cuts you'll need. So I always just mark off from the edge that I know is the correct length and just draw a rough 45-degree angle. So, after I finally finished cutting everything, I took off all the hardcore burrs, the little pieces of metal that were stuck to the edges of the steel for when I cut them off, just so that when I assemble everything, I can get those clean edges on clean edges and just make sure everything fits properly. So after doing that, it's finally time to clean everything up with an angle grinder. Normally I'll just use a 80 grit flapper disc, and then we can weld everything together. With the arms in place, everything works, fits, I can finally start tack welding all my pieces together. Now this is just a very light way of holding everything together so that if I do need to cut something, I don't need to cut along the whole length, and it's really just small little melted blobs of steel on the corners, just so that when I assemble it, everything's going to be in the correct dimension. With everything tacked up, I can reassemble my bench with all my corner pieces welded up together. I can make sure all my holes fit, and everything works as it should. And with all of that done, I can finally put on all these solid welds so that my bench is actually strong enough to support a bike, and I can weld up all the bigger pieces together again. I also need to cut some square tubing just to act as a locking mechanism for the lifting arms. So all I'm going to do is cut off a standard length here and then mark them off on my bench using a little center hole finder, so I can drill the holes and make sure that they all line up correctly. Next we need to sand and paint everything. So just before I can start sanding, I need to make sure all the steel is clean, there's no oil, there's no dirt, there's no loose flake on it. And I can prime with the NS4, which is just a water-based primer. When everything's dried and cured, I can start painting my undercoat. Now this is just going to be the color that you'll see from the trim. So this isn't going to be the final color of the bench. I'm just going with neon orange here because it's going to look pretty cool against the satin black. Unfortunately, the neon orange did not look anywhere near as nice as I thought. So what I thought would be a nice fluorescent orange was actually pretty dull, especially when we went over the grey NS4. So after spraying it, letting it dry, realizing it looked like trash, I realized I'd have to sand it down and start the whole process over again. Now this time I'm not taking any chances and spraying a metallic gold, which again isn't going to be the final color, it's just going to be for the small accents. My bench finally painted and cured, I can install my wheels. These aren't anything fancy, I'm just using normal caster wheels here, and I'm just using self-drilling, self-tapping screws to hold them in place to make life a little bit easier. With the black paint dry, I can finally pull all the tape off, revealing the cool little gold undercolors, and you can finally start to get an idea of what the bench should look like when it's done. To assemble my bench, I'm just going to put all the bolts in loosely to make sure that everything fits, so that if I need to bend something or move something slightly, nothing is held up tight by another bolt. Before I can install my top, I just want to drill pilot holes in all the wooden planks. Because I'm putting a bolt quite close to the edge, I don't want the wood to split. To get the spacing between my planks correct, I just use little pop rivets to act as spacers so I can pop them in, knock my plank up against the other one, and make sure all the edges line up. With all the planks on the top bolted down, I can finally just sand the top down to make sure it's nice and clean and super smooth before I put a wood sealer on top.